Welcome. My name's Cliff Freilich. I'm the Executive Director of Cinema St. Louis, and we're the presenters of the 29th Annual Whitaker St. Louis International Film Festival. Tonight's the official kickoff, and we couldn't be more pleased to offer 846 as our opening night film, and we're especially excited, obviously, to be welcoming Dave Chappelle, who will be joining us momentarily, to hold a live conversation about the film that you've just seen. We're also joined, well, before I get into the folks who are going to be talking, I should offer a word of thanks, and that's the Powell Law Firm, who are the sponsors of tonight's event, and they enabled us to offer this event entirely for free. So we really want to thank them for their support of the festival. All right, let's get to it. We don't want to waste any time. So the people who are going to be joining us are Dave's co-directors of 846, and those are the Oscar-winning directors of last year's American Factory, Steven Bognar and Julia Reichert. And then the person who's going to be conducting the interview is Kamau Bilal. Kamau is a terrific documentarian himself. He resides in Columbia, Missouri. He's done any number of films that have played here at the festival. And he most recently shot Long Gone, the film about Mark McGuire and Sammy Sosa that AJ Schnock contributed. And Dave has just joined us. So I'm now going to turn things over to Kamau.
Hey, David.
Hey, Julia. Hey, Steve.
Hi.
Hello, Kamau.
Here in Yellow Springs.
Oh man, I miss home.
We miss you. Yeah.
So nice to meet you guys. So nice to be here this evening, and thank you, Dave, for sharing your presence with us this evening.
Pleasure's mine.
Yeah. So let's get right into it. So you guys live in Yellow Springs, Ohio.
You do.
What's life like in Yellow Springs? How did this how did you end up?
You guys want to take it?
How did this come about? Right.
Yes.
Life in Yellow Springs is good. I talked about it when I did my next guest with David Letterman. It's a small town, about 3,800 people. It's a college town. Antioch University is there. It's literally called a village. The village of Yellow Springs. It doesn't qualify to be a town because the population is so small. We got 3 or 4 stoplights. Everyone's face is kind of familiar with everyone else. And it's a very community-oriented kind of place. And I mean that in the best kind of way. During COVID or any other difficult time that I've experienced when I lived there, the community always kind of rallies around. They have the best food bank. We take care of each other. It's a moray of our community. It used to be more diverse, but it still is a diverse place. It used to be very diverse, and in recent years, with the economic downturn in Ohio, everywhere kind of changed. There was a lot of jobs that left our area suddenly about 10 years ago, and I think the area is just starting to slowly rebound from that. That phenomenon Steve and Julia covered beautifully in the Oscar-winning documentary, American Factory.
Wonderful film, wonderful film.
Beautiful. Yeah. And I think the reason that 846 came to be is because we both live in the same town, and Dave could just drive over to our house, or we could drive over to his house. But this is really a lot how we started. This was really our first time working together, right, David? When
it is.
You came and said, hey, here's an idea. Here's something I want to see happen in our town, right?
Well, during COVID, the assumption was live performances were over. So a friend of mine had a pavilion that he built in a cornfield, beautiful pavilion. No rhyme or reason why he built it. It was just like an inspired thing that he and his wife did. And I asked them if I could use it to throw shows, which was a long shot. But I found out, like a lot of the local concert entities, people who had been furloughed from the concert business, which was supposed to be over. And as they got furloughed, I'd pick them up. I'd hire them. And they helped me build this empty cornfield into an actual outdoor venue. And then what we did was we did everything specifically to COVID specs. Now the governor of Ohio is literally from our town. I had done a thing in Dayton after the mass shooting in the Oregon district, which the community was very happy about. And because I had done that, he was like, okay, I'll give you permission, literally, to do this, but I have some concerns. So the COVID protocols were very strict by governor's orders, and we just tried it out. We didn't know if a show was even possible with this. Everyone sitting 6 feet apart and standing together. We slowly chipped away at perfecting a COVID protocol. Now, ultimately, we ended up doing many shows, but the first night we tried it, I said, as soon as we can get 30 people or more in a place together, let's try it. We had 75 people the very first night, and that show was what became 846.
Oh, wow.
At the time, I had just reached out to Steven Julia to see if I could get someone to just document something archivally. But after that first night, we understood that this could be something more substantial than just a home video. This could be something beautiful.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious what the atmosphere was like with the crowd and the response. Like once, because it starts off like, okay, this is Dave Chappelle, and then all of a sudden there's this radical shift and the energy just gets really thick. You know, it gets really raw. I'm curious, what was your what were you feeling from the audience like perspective in that moment? Was there?
This is a very good question. If you remember a few months back, what it felt like when George Floyd was killed, the feeling was a very prevalent feeling. It was heartbreaking. The cities erupted, all of these things, and imagine if I had sat in that cornfield and just did jokes. What people who normally come see me would never expect that from me. Talking about George Floyd was a necessity. I couldn't talk about anything else before I talked to him. And the feeling was that I should put this out because I don't want to have to talk about this every night because it's heartbreaking. It's not funny. I don't want to joke about it, but people need catharsis about it, which was what made such an urgency for, I think, the three of us to get 846 into a public space and address it, and so that I could move forward artistically without having to break my own heart every night.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's impressive even just about your comedy in general is that you're able to weave these very big issues and personal, intimate things all kind of in one sort of like interesting Dave Chappelle ball. That's amazing. And this sort of transcended even what you had done in the past to like to a new height. You know, I'm curious, how did you arrive at being able to be the comedian that can do that? You know, where you're just
oh, that's like I don't know. It takes years and years, man. But I do know that when it came time that I knew I had to say something publicly, I wasn't at a loss of things to say. It's more like it was more of a process of elimination. Because of course these issues are long-standing, as old as the country itself. But this was one of those moments where these feelings came to a head. I was so grateful. You know, Steve and Julia are very sensitive filmmakers, very perceptive filmmakers. And I think one of the things I really loved about the piece was the very beginning, because it was such a humble and earnest effort when they show everyone, sitting in those circles and getting the heat checks and putting those masks on, and all these extreme things that we used to consider extreme to do just to have a kind of a night out, know. And in the beginning of this process, I would pay people cash when they worked at the venue, because I didn't know if I was going to be able to continue from week to week. If any time there was someone got COVID or this, that, or the other, there was always a threat of being shut down. And I didn't want someone to give up their benefits, their unemployment benefits, for something that I might just do once or twice. It was real tenuous. We just didn't know. And something about the ambiance that they captured was very true to the night. It was an effort just to go out and have fun, and everybody from the audience to the crew to the comedians that were there. I wasn't the only one there. Michelle Wolf performed, and other people performed. Another guy from Cincinnati went on. We were all just stretching to be outside again. We had all been locked up for months at that point. 3 months, I think, was at that point.
Yeah. Something that I found like of particular interest was just your use of signs, and just obviously the title, and then its relationship with your own personal being at the time that you were born. How and / when did you connect your relationship with that number? Did you I don't know if everybody walks around knowing what time of day they're born, but like what's interesting also was that, like, because August 9th was my birthday, and that's the day that Mike Brown was killed. So it's something when I started thinking about that, once you mentioned that, I was like, oh, and then you started connecting all of these other signs. So
I'm not like a numerology freak or anything like that, but if you do know that you're born at 8:46, the reason I know that is because I had to get my birth certificate once for a legal document. And I looked up, oh, I was born at 8:46 in the morning. You know what I mean? I don't know why. It's just one of these things I remember. And then when I'm watching the coverage of what had happened to George Floyd, and the newscaster says this officer kneeled on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, the number jumped out at me. The same way when I saw Kobe's jerseys hanging in the Raptors and it said 8:24, it's like, oh my God, it's my birthday. You know, it's something about these tragedies and how, you know, they were in fairly close proximity. I'm talking about the death of George Floyd and the death of Kobe Bryant, and how all these numbers were on my birth certificate. It jumped out at me. It wasn't like something I had to comb through my brain to think of. It was reflexive.
Interesting. And so I guess Steven, Julia, too, you guys can jump in on this question. This is sort of a big question, and it kind of goes into when you talk about how our proximity to slavery and its relationship to sort of the present tense in our just world events and the way things happen. I'm just sort of curious why you think people are continually surprised that we have these issues come up in America, these issues of, is it lack of education? And like,
I don't know that people are surprised. It's hard to tell what's spin and what's not spin when it comes to the thought process of other people. You know what I mean? Is it surprising that there's still racial tension? Is this something that has ever been thoroughly dealt with or cleaned up? You know, or even discussed in a public space where would have any sustainability? Since the civil rights movement, I don't know. And a lot of those changes, some would say, are cosmetic.
I know, Dave. If I could just throw in, I just rewatched 846, Dave, just before we went on. And, you know, you talk about, you know, you said slavery is such a crazy concept. And then you talk about your great grandfather. And of course, you end up by saying, this is the person who my father, great grandmother, called out for as he was dying, that your dad, Bill Chappelle, called out for. And you said, these things are not that old. And that is true. We're connected. Our memories are connected. It's like here in Yellow Springs, and you talk about this, Dave, we have a former enslaved person still benefits our town, a guy named Wheeling Gaunt, not a famous name, but he is very well known in Yellow Springs, and Dave sometimes talks about him. To this day, there's a big park that he, having bought his freedom, donated toward the end of his life to our town. And like every year at either Thanksgiving or Christmas, because of what he bequeathed to our town, Wheeling Gaunt, every widow and widower gets a pound of flour and a pound of sugar. You know, these things are not that old. What's that?
My father's widow still gets it.
Still gets the pound of, wow.
See, there you go.
Yeah, she lives in town.
I sort of feel like Dave, why is Dave in Yellow Springs? Why are we in Yellow Springs? There's a little bit of a connection there. It's a kind of a town where there's a tradition of, like Wheeling Gaunt, right? Of people giving back, of people helping each other. And it's a kind of tradition that I feel like we need so much right now.
Yeah, but it's easy to feel you're in a bubble. You know, there's nothing like a reality check that still tens of millions of people would vote for like this racist criminal,
Mm.
even after 4 years of putting up with him. You know, it's like 4 years ago, we would talk to factory workers who said, well, I'm going to give this guy a chance, right?
Yeah.
And you could sort of, it's a stretch, but you could sort of say, oh, okay, yeah. But now for tens of millions of Americans to still vote for this guy, that means history is not, the history of this, America's original sins are very much still with us.
Mm-hmm.
That's very
It's not
true.
that long ago. Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, when saying this is now, I think it's interesting because my son, who's 5, he's now starting to recount things that we did like last year. He's like, oh, we went to St. Louis, but he'll say yesterday. So he still doesnit's understand. So this construct that we have of time as being like, oh no, that was actually like a year ago we went to St. Louis, not yesterday. So it's like, well, maybe there's something to learn from, you know, like what is our understanding of time versus how he sees it as being just like all lumped, you know.
There's some beauty in it. My daughter's 11. I always remind myself Donald Trump's her first white president. It's a mind-boggling concept.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a mind-boggling concept. I
Kamau?
told her all white presidents aren't that bad, but not much better. That's not that I had to tell her that.
Kamau, I'd like to have a question from the audience, if we can offer one to Dave.
Right.
Kason Scruggs says, in your Mark Twain acceptance speech, you talked about how your mother told you a quote, sometimes you have to be a lion in order to be the lamb you really are. Do you feel that this quote inspired you in the making of 846?
Yeah, well, yeah. I think that part of 846, when I saw it, like the original set, like I said we should put it out. Normally I would do a piece like that, I'd be more precise and careful, I'd been more refined. Like I said, mistakes like that Wilson, I mixed up Wilson and Roosevelt's sequence in the presidency, just little mistakes like that. But the reason I didn't refine it is because it would become less genuine with repetition, and it was very heartfelt. I hadn't spoke publicly at all during COVID before that, and it was honest. It was so honest it made me uncomfortable, but it also it was a catharsis in it. If it was what I was feeling, I know so many people feel that way, so I said I'll share it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you ever watch it, like I put that on the explanation. Normally I don't put something out this refined, and I hope you understand. But and many people did, I think.
Yeah. And
Go
I was just going to say, we talking about not refining it. Dave could have gone up on the stage a few more times and done it. We edited that together, the three of us, you know, talking on the phone and so forth, in like 4 or 5 days. It was really, really fast.
Very intense.
And it was a really wonderful collaboration.
But we all felt the urgency.
Yeah, we felt like we have to get it out. The protests in the streets, which Dave talks about a lot, we're going on all over the country. And I love that Dave early on said, you know, that he's happy to be in the back seat. He's happy to let the young ones drive, because that was happening all over the country right at that point on June 6th.
Yeah, you did the research. June 6th was the peak in terms of numbers of protests in numbers of cities. June 6th was the peak day.
We didn't know that. We didn't know that.
Oh, wow.
But there was vast numbers of people in the streets, like right then. And Dave made a very important statement, like, hey, my generation, us, should like, okay, it's okay. We're going to take the back seat on this. And I'm very comfortable. And that's one reason we had that as one of the early parts in the film. Yeah. Anyway, it was a great process.
Yeah, my children were real active in the protests initially. It was scary as a parent, you know, when your kids go out there, but at the same time, you don't want to stop them from having their voices be heard. And thank God they were all safe. And I was actually very proud of them. because they were very mature about it. They were very measured about it, and they were very clear about why they were out there. It wasn't exciting to them. They didn't romanticize the chaos. They really were moved by what happened to this person. They're young. They'd never seen a heinous murder on television before.
In fact, your son was tear gassed, Dave, and the footage at the end of 846, one of the pieces of footage is that moment where your son was at one of those protests, the one in Beaver Creek near the mall.
Yeah, they tear gassed him. It was actually really funny. Not funny that he got tear gassed, but he tried to. No, never mind. I'm not gonna tell a story.
You remember, I was just thinking about when I watched it again, Dave, we talked about the last little sequence of protests. And, we had a vast amount of protest footage we could have chosen. I mean, there were cops beating people. There was blood in the streets. There were like much more. But if you remember, the last few shots are people standing up to the police, right? The last
Young
shot
women.
is a woman arguing and yelling at the police. But we decided, right, Dave, that we didn't want to go to like the absolute violence. We didn't want to leave people on that note. We wanted to leave people on the note of it's confrontation. We have to talk. We have to be strong against the police. So we decided.
Yeah, I actually thought that the way the ending was edited made me feel hopeful in many ways, because these kids were so brave and were so flat-footed and firm about their beliefs. And in this internet age, you don't know that these kids can do that. You don't know that they have this type of attention span and staying power. And man, they look so beautiful. They look so strong out there. It was sad to me when a lot of the, some of these protests evolved into riots. There was disruptors. There was looting at some of these riots, but some of these things when they became riots. However, I hope that people in the long term don't discount the true energy and the true spirit that mobilized people on the streets, and I hope that George Floyd's family finds some solace in that solidarity. That people of all races and all colors understood that it was a crime against humanity. It was a really inhumane thing to see.
We have a question from a viewer that relates to this. My question for Dave is from Caleb is, do you believe the United States will finally make progress toward racial equality and police reform?
I'm hopeful about it. I literally don't like making these types of predictions because I don't think these moments are for me to interpret that way. I think that there is a chance to make real progress. I think that sadly the catalyst for this progress has to be a tragedy or tragedies like the ones we've experienced this summer. But we're polarized. We're all looking at the same thing at the same time. And when people do that, sometimes progress gets made.
One final question from the audience, Dave, and this again relates to what you're just talking about. Given the urgency of the film, how do we recapture that urgency and place it in a news cycle that has since replaced the police reform and the movement toward racial equality with COVID-19, very important, obviously, and the election? So how do we sort of return to that conversation at this point?
I think that in your life and in your social circles, not just on social media, in real life, you keep having those conversations. News cycles are like weather. It's raining one day, it's sunny one day. The news should be following us. We're not following the news. We're making the news. But the way we live is what's worth reporting. When we're living well and excellent and great and bravely, that's the news. So don't worry about what the media pays attention to. If a tree falls in the woods and I am not there, does it make a sound? I'm sure it does.
Nice. What was the I guess the response once because now it's been a few months since it was released. What was the response to the film?
That I would hear personally overwhelmingly positive. it was cathartic for people that we had expressed something that the larger conversation hadn't touched on. The emotional content of seeing that was really intense. It sparked what happened for the rest of the summer. It was a
It was
murder that was
overwhelming.
played on a loop on television, sometimes with commercials. It's heartbreaking.
You know,
In a
we've been
way,
filmmakers for a long time, and we've never made anything that had that kind of immediate heightened response. It was overwhelming for us. 30 million people saw it in like a week, and the passionate response was just amazing. It was just an incredible honor to get to work with Dave on this and to be part of this.
likewise, Steve.
Yeah.
And Julia.
And we all, just buckled down and did it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we enjoyed it. I mean, we enjoyed the process. We got it out.
I want to just throw out one thing. We were talking about brave young people, and one incredibly brave young person who doesn't get mentioned enough is Darnella Frazier, who actually stood there and filmed the murder of George Floyd, and she did not flinch. You know, Kamau, you're a cinematographer, we're cinematographers. It's like filming the murder of someone excruciatingly long, minute after minute, as Dave so says it so well in 846. Think about being behind that camera and the courage it took. And she's 17 and she did not flinch. And that foot and her camera angle and her poise just helped make that have the impact that it needed to have.
Yeah, she didn't flinch with all those police standing around, and
yeah,
sure she felt intimidated.
Yeah,
but the camera didn't move, and she had a good angle. 17 years old. Wow.
17, oh man, I didn't know.
What's her name again?
Darnella Frazier.
Darnella Frazier.
Yeah.
Don't forget that.
So there's also, you guys cut in some other footage too. Like there's some photos of, you know, the Eric Garner footage. And what was the decision, the process of using, sort of coming to the conclusion to use that stuff in the edit?
Kamau, can I interrupt ever so briefly and then let Julia and Steve answer that question? Dave, I know, needs to head on out. He needs to actually, I think he's going to be doing a performance shortly, so he needs to gather his thoughts. We want to note the fact that everyone is very grateful. This is response from our audience. Everyone is very grateful today for being a hopeful, inspiring, and thoughtful public figure, and we could not be more grateful for your presence here tonight.
Thank you.
Oh man, it's an honor, and I really do appreciate everyone taking interest in the film. Steve and Julia, I love you. I can't wait till I see you at home. Kamau, it was very good to meet you. It was very good to meet you. I don't know your name.
Cliff.
The moderator. What is it?
Cliff.
Cliff. Pleasure to meet you. And tune in on Saturday night. I'll be live from New York.
All right.
I know. Hey, good luck. Good luck for. Hopefully, you'll help Georgia go the right way.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Somehow the vibe. Well,
Need a little,
you're in like the hot spot of democracy right now.
Yeah.
Well, God save this country. We need some
Yeah.
help. All right, much love, y'all. Be safe, and thank you again for having me.
Thank you.
Okay.
All
Bye,
right.
David.
Bye, y'all.
All right, Kamau, I'll turn things back to you, and we're going to continue with Steve and Julia.
Yeah. So, if you guys do you remember the question about?
Yeah, it's a great question. Dave and Julia and I and Sina was also involved a lot, one of the producers on the film. We were talking about, should we ever leave the stage? Dave, as a master storyteller, you know, as you said, Kamau, he weaves brilliantly. And would it disrupt the experience to cut away from Dave?
The feeling of like a live, you're really there, you know, a live performance.
But at the same time, he's talking about Tamir Rice, he's talking about John Crawford, he's talking about Eric Garner. It felt like we should try this and see. So we put in those leaving of the stage moments, going to footage, going to photos, and we all felt like, you know what, actually it works. It doesn't throw us off doesn't break the spell that Dave is weaving, you know, and so we left it in.
Okay. I don't want.
But it was we weren't sure about that.
Yeah. And I don't know if you guys said it earlier. Did you, how long, you said you cut the film in
4 or 5 days?
Well,
wasn't it?
It was 5 or 6 days, really. But it was like really almost around the clock. We were working furiously because we filmed it on a Saturday night, June 6th. We started editing Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It was released like Thursday night, and we were editing right up until the release.
Yeah, the actual performance was longer, but I think Dave actually selected the parts that he thought were the best.
Yeah.
And then turned him over to us, and then we just started talking.
But we also, like, the moment where Dave talks about honoring young people and he's happy to be in the back seat, you sort of said that wasn't in the cut at first.
It wasn't, right.
And you brought that up as being a really good moment, and we all thought, you know what, actually, yeah, it is. It helps set the stage for the rest of the piece. It comes right quite near the beginning, you know. But you know, it's the editing. It was always focused on making the most powerful, focused piece, but also you have to have moments of humor as well.
Yeah,
so it was a tightrope.
Tightrope, yeah. You know, I think it's interesting because, like, in documentary, we're talking about this kind of beforehand. Just like you're always chasing this sort of like moment of transcendence that kind of happens, and it feels like this whole thing was just like this. And you say it's a little bit longer. It's like 45 minutes. So it's like this 45-minute chunk of sort of transcendence. What's it feel like to capture that, being behind the camera in that moment as it unfolds?
It was
being on the ground.
Yeah.
We just knew we had just been through something. I'm sure as a filmmaker, Kamau, I'm sure you've experienced that. That it's like you just, after it's over, you're like, wow.
Yeah.
I don't know. This was incredibly powerful. And at the same time, as a filmmaker, you're also trying to do right by, you know, documenting it well, being in focus and all those little things. But at the end, I think we all looked at each other like, holy cow.
What did we just go through? I don't think any of us really knew what Dave was going to do. You know,
we didn't.
We didn't know. And it almost is like you held your breath for like 45 minutes because it just it goes deeper and deeper, and he weaves the stories.
Yeah.
And it becomes personal, global. You know, it's an astounding performance. And I think, I don't know, you know, I think I was doing sound that night, and Steve was shooting. We had a couple of younger other cinematographers.
There were 4 other cinematographers.
Yeah, we literally had recruited them the day before.
Wow.
You know, I mean, I think so. The governor of Ohio called Dave that Friday morning, whatever it was, June 5th, and said, okay, we'll give you permission if you temperature test and keep everybody, you know, all the things that they did for safety. And then within an hour or two, he called us and we took a walk together, and he said, look, I have this idea. I want to try to do this. He drove us out to the pavilion because we'd never seen it. Right. And he said, what do you think? You know, and like,
said, yeah, let's do it. And then we immediately called these younger cinematographers. Luckily, not luckily, COVID meant a lot of people weren't working, right? So we said, look, we're going to try to film socially distant, safe, but we need a team, and it's tomorrow night. Can you make it? And these 4 other camera people, 1 other sound person, they showed up, and we did it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's amazing looking at it like now, because it was like one of the first things that really made it a point to show all of the things that you were doing to make sure that it was like there's like masks and like you know, there's tape on the ground, and like now it's like this historical thing where it's like this is what we really wanted to see from our like administration, just like, hey, just present, you know.
Exactly. I know. And you know, between the governor and Dave's folks, they figured it out, and you know, it worked. There was not this was not a COVID hotspot.
Yeah.
Well, like some of the parties and rallies that you hear about later, where like so many people got sick. Nobody got sick as a result of that, you know. So it was done right, and people respected it.
That's great.
And the shows went on, as I guess was referred to, like all summer.
I bet that was great to have in Yellow Springs.
Yeah.
It really made the summer in this town.
Yeah.
Now we have a question for Julia and Steve from the audience, from Case and Scuggs. Steve and Julia, you both have made films surrounding social justice before. How did those films inform you for this one?
That's a good question.
Wow. You know, this is the first time we've answered questions about this film. So we don't have answers that we, you know, got rolled up and we can just bring them out, you know.
I mean, I would say that every film we make, you know, hopefully teaches us stuff. The process of trying to be a conscious human being and be aware of your unconscious bias and your blind spots and your all this, you know, we're trying to be aware of our whiteness, of our class, middle classness, of our age, all these things. We're always trying to grapple with consciousness, right? And every film you make humbles you, I think, because we're so wrong so much of the time. And the editing room is where you try to learn to not be wrong, and to figure out how you were going to represent a person, how you're going to tell a story honorably, thoughtfully, you know, and so I don't know. I mean, Julia's been making socially conscious films since her first film in 1971, Growing Up Female, and every film has taught us.
Do you find that what you learn from one film is helpful, or can it also be harmful in some way? Like you take something that you learned from a film that you made before, and then you try to apply that rule or whatever it was to the new film, and it winds up maybe undoing you.
I'll tell you, Kamau, I feel like, you know, so it's been 50 years, all right. So I would have to say that all the films build on each other that I've made, either co-made or made with Steve, you know. And I learned from each one, and each one, you know, the last big one, American Factory, I feel like that film is nothing we could have done if like we hadn't done the earlier films.
Sure.
Like we learned so much about working with other cultures, about, you know, working class and factory work, and what those lives were like before they lost, what those jobs meant to people. And so the loss of those jobs was incredibly important to them, and what it was like, why they would take a $12 an hour job. Like we understood all that very deeply because of earlier work we'd done. So I feel as though you never make rules. Boy, I'll tell you, you never make rules, but you learn. Right?
But you're right, though. There is a danger, Kamau, that like the thing that worked well for you in a previous movie becomes almost like a trap for you, or it's a way to get stuck. So for example, we had made a film in the same factory where American Factory, our movie, was filmed. We had made an earlier film 8 years earlier, and it was all from the blue collar American worker point of view. And so when we started making the new film, American Factory, we thought, oh, it'll be from the blue collar working class American point of view.
Yeah.
And, you know, the story is about a Chinese company that comes to Ohio. And we did not, this is stupid, you know, I'm embarrassed to say this, but it's like, we didn't immediately think, oh, we have to tell the story from the Chinese point of view and the American point of view. And we certainly didn't think, oh, we're also going to tell it from the management point of view and the floor worker, line worker point of view. So in the end, it was our blinders were on, but we learned no, that's going to be a much more interesting film if we try to tell it cross-culturally and cross-class, you know, and that's, once we got that, the movie expanded and became better.
It was kind of a shock the first time we walked into that factory again, because we'd been there we'd been in there once before with making The Last Truck. So you walk in there, you're expecting to see all these, you know, American factory workers, and there's hundreds of Chinese people in there. And suddenly it sort of hits you that like, wow, this is a whole different story than I thought I was going to be telling. It took us a little while to adjust.
Yeah, we had to get out of.
We had to,
get unstuck.
as Steve said,
Get
yeah,
unstuck.
yeah, right.
Was if I could ask, is it so you won an Oscar for that film? What was hanging out with Dave Chappelle doing this or winning the Oscar? What's the
it's way more fun to hang out with Dave.
Yeah.
Oh, way better than to go to that whole Oscar
The
thing,
Oscar
man.
thing is very stressful.
I mean, really.
We feel very grateful that we got to go to the show. Don't get me wrong.
When you're with Dave, you can wear whatever you want. You don't have to put makeup on. You don't have to have your hair done. You know, it's, you know, Dave will come over in our backyard.
Community like hardly anyone I've ever met. Like he's always building community and connecting people and being thoughtful. The Oscars was just so stressful because it's like, you know, even though we love our fellow filmmakers and we actually got really close to the other documentarians who were on the circuit last year, you know, that they were our haven, but you're surrounded by the Hollywood world and it's just, it's stressful.
We were so glad to be done with that.
Yeah.
It was like a year of our life. So be ready. If you ever get an Oscar nomination, be ready to give up a year of your life.
You'll find
and your
out
kids
someday.
will not see you.
Kamau, I have a question related to that. This was from Edward Frumkin, and the question is for Dave. Well, Dave's gone, but Steve and Julia. SLIF is an Oscar qualifying festival. Will you consider submitting 846 to the Oscars as best documentary short?
We would, yeah, absolutely. We're very proud of it. We think it's an amazing piece, and we would be grateful if the Academy would consider it. So we're gonna, we would like to submit it. Yeah.
And it could depend somewhat on the St. Louis Film Festival. Film Festival. Because it's an Oscar qualifying festival.
Yeah.
You know, I did want to say something. We started going to the St. Louis Film Festival years ago. My first movie in 1996 was a film about my dad called Personal Belongings. It played at St. Louis at the film festival, and it was just a great town and a great experience to be there. And then the
film series was there, Webster.
Oh yeah, Webster Film Series. I went to.
I came to that a couple of times at least. Yeah.
And then our friend David Wilson, who Kamau, you're friends with, and his colleagues AJ and Nate, they premiered a film called "We Always Lie to Strangers." And we so wanted to be there for the premiere that we got in our car here in Dayton, Ohio. Got on I-70. So Interstate 70 is 6 miles that way from us, right? Because I-70 goes from Baltimore to Denver. We got in our car, drove up to 70, and drove 6 hours to see a movie at the St.Louis International Film Festival. And we were there for the premiere, and that was super fun.
And then we drove home.
Which was insane because we got home at like 5 in the morning. But
do you have another? I'm just curious. What was Dave? Was he involved? How involved in the editing? Was it like? So you said you were on the phone a little bit.
Very involved. He came over. So we edited it here in our house, and Dave came over and sat right with us, a little huddle, and then we would send cuts. We would upload. When he couldn't come here, we would upload Vimeo cuts with a password. We went through something like 18 cuts of this film. I mean, it was very intense and regular, and we were uploading morning, noon, or night, or he would come over odd hours and we'd just talk it through, hash it through, every little thing. But he was very involved. He's definitely a co-director with us.
Oh yeah, co-director and co-producer. There's no question about it. Yeah. I think is this his first movie he's co-directed? I don't even know. It might be. Yeah, and I think it sort of grew over those 5 days or whatever, like really into a collaboration. We realized we were committed to making it the best. I mean, I think Dave is maybe a little more used to saying, this is what I want. We'd push back and then he'd push back and this is what I really mean. And then we'd come up with an idea and run it by him. It was very there was a lot of creative energy flowing through the room, throughout the whole process. It was great. It was very intense.
We have a question from the audience again. Daniel Esbell says, so many other concert film stand-up specials have really flashy production value and sweeping camera movements. Was it
Right.
a conscious decision for that not to be present here? And he adds, if so, I think it works great.
Well, thank you. Again, we found out like more or less 24 hours ahead that we were going to even be doing this. Was it even 24? So the idea of having like those swooping, I'm glad we didn't do it, but that wouldn't have been possible. It's also totally not our style. If you've seen our films, like we don't have used any of that, like sort of eye candy, I guess you would call it. I guess I trust the audience to be smart and to be able to pay attention. And I certainly trusted Dave and the other comedians to hold our attention and to weave wonderful stories.
Yeah.
So no, but thanks for the compliment that it worked. I mean, it's there's two or three, there's a few shots of the audience.
Yeah.
I think there's 2 different angles on the stage, 1 from the side and 2 from the front, maybe just 1 from the front.
Feels like we just see the one a lot.
Well, yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
There's a point where the cool toys just take away from the storytelling.
Yeah.
And we didn't want that.
Well, again, there's something like that. There's a moment where it's just, you can see Dave just sort of like going through it. And there's not a lot of cutting happening either, and which is far more gripping than you trying to manipulate with a cut, I think.
I love long takes. I love long takes where you feel like, it makes you more feel like you're there. The filmmaker is not imposing their ideas on it. It's just really, I also think audiences are really smart.
Oh yeah.
Are a lot smarter than, sometimes like TV would have you think,
And Dave's raw honesty, we just wanted to honor that, It's like you cut away from it and you take away from he's really putting himself out there. It's vulnerable. He's vulnerable. He's so authentic. And every edit would disrupt that in a way that we didn't want to do.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. And I think it's probably a good thing you didn't have enough time to think about trying to get a boot, like a giant, we got to get the Steadicam and we got to have, the jib arm.
Lights and stuff. No, there wasn't any of
no. So true.
Yeah. You just have to kind of run and gun and do it.
Well, there were only about 60 or 75 people in the audience too. We were all just pretty close together. As over the summer, it got bigger and bigger. In the end, there were only a few hundred, 400, maybe something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Sorry. It was interesting when you said before this all we got online, you were mentioning that at the moment where he starts talking about Chris Dorner, the police officer. I remember when I first watched it, sort of wondering, how's he gonna get, like, where is he going with this? How is he gonna make this work? And he kind of really just has this magical touch with it. What was it like when you were filming?
Right. The last line is, they killed one of their own. So what do you expect? It just crystallized, I think, the audience immediately bursts into applause. He didn't have to make it more explicit than that. It's mesmerizing. To watch Dave weave these stories is very mesmerizing.
How he can go from like intense analysis of America and the American situation to very funny humor to deeply personal, intimate stories, and how he does that. There's an old saying, you probably heard it, that talent can hit a target that no one else can hit, but genius hits a target that no one else can see, and that's Dave.
Yeah, you're right, because it's like, as it comes up, and then you're like, oh, that's where it's going.
Yeah,
definitely.
He did that a few times, like when he brought up slavery, what a crazy concept. And he weaves it all the way through his great-grandfather and Woodrow Wilson and Teddy Roosevelt, and finally gets around to his father's dying words, which were the same pretty much as George Floyd's dying words. They called for his mother, they called for his, he just made that all happen.
Yeah, he really is.
Yeah. I just watched it again, as I said, and the last line, I think, is he talks about the stage like this. is the
Yeah.
stronghold of
Mhm.
civil discourse,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Well,
pretty much.
And that feels even sadder right now.
yeah, seriously.
As
when
far apart as we are,
I mean, here we are right after the election.
Yeah.
There's a sense of foreboding, like what's
Mhm.
what's going to happen, and obviously we all hope things will just be resolved and no one will feel a need to go getting violent. But you hear plots to kidnap the governor of Michigan,
Mhm. Yeah.
and put her on trial out in the woods, some militia.
Right.
It's like, what kind of country? Where have things gone? It's so insane.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. That's wild.
So
Yeah. And you guys were filming, so you said it was about 45 minutes. What was the, like, obviously where the film ends, what we see, what was the sort of like the milling around afterwards? What was the energy like
Oh,
in that moment? Did people just leave because it's like COVID, we got to go, or was it?
there wasn't it wasn't like a big hugging and milling
No.
thing. It was because of COVID, but I think people were in like kind of stunned at what they had just seen. Like there was a sense of like, holy cow, like what we were saying earlier about as camera people, this feeling of like we have just been lucky, privileged to experience an amazing moment of performance, of writing and performance.
And sort of raw emotional honesty.
Yeah. It was cathartic, as Dave said.
Yeah.
It was very cathartic.
Dave is somebody who you see around town a lot. You run into him at the grocery store, the coffee shop. No, it's true. And he's always engaging, but he generally is like funny. He's
kind and loose.
Yeah, right.
But this is a different
This
moment.
was really, really much deeper part of Dave. Not that we didn't think it was there, but he just let it out there on stage.
Well, the moment needed it.
Yeah, he just
Yeah.
I use the word mesmerizing because that's what it felt like. I felt like I held my breath for 45 minutes.
That was amazing. Yeah. And he had that notebook. Do you guys know anything about the
notebook?
Yeah.
Yeah, you noticed that. Dave does not normally carry a notebook, and that notebook, he had it backstage. We were backstage, all in the green room, as they say. And he and the other comedian, whose name is Michelle Wolf, one of the other comedians, she was the person who at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, she sort of tore it.
She famously said, Mike Pence is what happens when Anderson Cooper can't be gay. And she also said, CNN loves breaking news. Well, congratulations, you broke it. Anyway. Or something like that. Really funny, great funny jokes. And then they stopped doing the White House Correspondents' Dinner after Michelle.
That was it. Michelle broke it, right? So she was here, and
she had a notebook too.
She had a really a really notebook with page after page after page after page written on. Dave had just a few notes.
Okay.
And he brought it out on stage, which I think for people who know Dave, he doesn't usually do that.
Well, I think it speaks to the moment. He's still really he was processing what he was going to do and say and where he was going to go.
And I think he wanted to make sure he had all the names of everybody, right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, sure.
Because he went through a lot of history there.
Yeah.
So it was just an unusual step for him.
Any comedy show is a high wire act because you're always trying to walk the line of what will work and can you try this and will an audience go with you? Yeah. But this was at a higher level of high wire act. It's like because he was going to be really raw, vulnerable, personal, and still in moments still trying to be funny and taking those turns and hoping that we would all just be with him. That so it makes sense to me that he would have a notebook for something, and he had never done it before.
No, this is a one-time thing that we captured. That is captured in A46 that everybody can get to see. He never did it again.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think when I've captured something, and I remember there's times afterwards when I'll just go look. Like I'll put the camera down, I'll just like stare at the camera and just kind of be like, what? You're like, because you're still trying to process what it was and you can't believe I remember doing this recently, and I took a picture of the camera, and I was just sort of like, couldn't believe or understand what all was like happening and what allowed me to be there and have the camera. Like in this situation, the camera's always on Dave, and you're not like having to worry about, oh, I'm gonna miss something, but
Yeah.
like you're always, there's like, oh, how did I get the camera right there, right when I needed to? And like you just make all the right choices and decisions. So
I know.
Oh yeah.
Did you, I'm wondering, you guys, I don't, Cliff's in St. Louis. Kamau, you're in Columbia?
Yeah.
Did much happen? What happened in Ferguson or in St. Louis, like after George Floyd?
Surprisingly, there were protests, obviously, but it wasn't as active as you might have anticipated, given obviously the background of Ferguson and the uprising here. But certainly there have been protests in the St. Louis area. Columbia, it strikes me, as probably a different case, that it's not. It's a college town, and obviously people are politically engaged. You tell me, Kamau, how active is there as people on the streets?
Oh yeah, no, it was,
You know.
especially right after, it was pretty intense. There was a lot of protesting happening actually, and it's funny because you kept getting these questions from one of my Kason. He's one of my students, and so he's pretty active on campus too, involved. So they're really into it. I mean, it's a college town, so there's a lot of energy and youth, I think, which is important,
All right, well, we need to wrap things up here. I wanted to make a few notes for those of you who are still with us and viewing. Let people know that this conversation was recorded and it's going to be appended to, we're showing 846 as part of another program called Doc Shorts, The Black Experience, which has got lots of other terrific films. So I highly recommend that program. It's also free. So 846 will be a part of that. And we will be posting this recording of this conversation, to accompany that particular program. So let people know who might have missed it that you think should catch 846 and listen to this conversation, that it's going to be available throughout the course of the festival, all the way to the 22nd of November. And then one last pitch. Steve and Julia obviously have 846 here, but they also have another great movie that's available only tomorrow. This is one of the few time-limited films that we have during the festival. You can only watch this film tomorrow. So 9 to 5, The Story of a Movement. Julia and Steve, do you want to briefly talk about 9 to 5?
Thanks for that plug.
Thanks for the plug. Yeah. A lot of people know the song, Dolly Parton song, working 9 to 5, that one. And the movie with Jane Fonda and Dolly and Lily. But what people don't know is that movie and that song grew out of a movement that had already been around for like 8 or 10 years at that point. And we made a film about that movement, which was a movement of white collar clerical workers who got sick and tired of having their asses pinched, being called girl, being asked, fetch my coffee. And they decided they weren't going to take it anymore. And they figured out how to change their situation. So that's what 9 to 5 is. And it's funny and has great archival footage, and Jane Fonda's in it. So I hope you get to see it.
Love a good
I highly recommend it. Of course, I'm a little biased here.
Thank you for listening it, though.
So let's wrap this conversation up. Thank you again to Steve and Julia for your willingness to take time out of your valuable day. And then thanks to you, Kamau. You've been a great friend of the festival. You've done lots of things for us. We featured several films that you've been involved with over the years, including Crown Candy that you co-directed with with David Wilson of True False. You also shot a terrific film that we played, Where the Sidewalk Ends, a couple years ago, that discusses, speaking of Ferguson, the divide between Ferguson and Kinloch. So we very much appreciate you being willing to step in here and serve as our moderator.
Thank you. Love the
All right.
Okay, it was great to meet you, Kamau.
You too. Take care,
Yeah.
guys.